"Where do you think you're going?" I asked Harold, my husband of 20 years, as he packed his bag without meeting my eyes. "I need some space, Eliza. I'll be staying with my mother for a while," he replied coldly, zipping up the suitcase with finality. My heart sank as the words hung in the air, their weight suffocating. The man I had shared a life with, the one I thought I knew better than anyone, was suddenly a stranger. With those few words, my entire world shifted on its axis, leaving me grasping for purchase in a reality that no longer made sense. Harold turned and walked out the door without another word, leaving me standing in the middle of our bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a life I had taken for granted. The ticking of the clock on the nightstand seemed deafening in the silence he left behind. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my hands trembling as I tried to process what had just happened. How could he just leave like that, without any explanation or warning? What had I missed? What signs had I been too blind to see? A knock at the front door jolted me from my daze, and I hurried to answer it, desperate for some semblance of normalcy. It was my oldest friend, Frances, her face etched with concern. "Eliza, what's going on? I saw Harold leaving with his suitcase," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat, tears welling in my eyes. Frances wrapped her arms around me, and I crumbled against her, sobs racking my body. "Shh, it's all right," she murmured, stroking my hair. "Tell me what happened." I pulled back, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "He left, Frances. Harold just packed a bag and left, said he needed space and was going to stay with his mother." Frances's brow furrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "That doesn't sound like him at all. Did he give you any reason?" I shook my head, feeling helpless and lost. "No, nothing. 1 minute everything was fine, and the next he was just gone." Frances took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Listen to me, Eliza. You can't let this break you. You're stronger than that, and you'll get through this, whatever it is." Her words were like a lifeline, anchoring me in the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "You're right. I can't just sit here and wallow. I need to figure out what's going on, why he would do this." Frances gave me a resolute nod. "That's my girl. Now, why don't you go freshen up and we'll take a walk around the neighborhood? Some fresh air might help clear your head." I squeezed her hand gratefully, already feeling a little steadier. As I made my way to the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. A woman of 61, with lines etched around her eyes and mouth, a lifetime of experiences written on her face. But there was a spark in those eyes, a determination that had been dormant for too long. My name is Eliza Parker, and this was the moment my life truly began. After Harold's abrupt departure, I found myself grasping for any semblance of normalcy in the life I had known. Frances insisted I call my children, Molly and Jacob, to let them know what had happened. "They need to hear it from you, Eliza," she said firmly, handing me the phone. "No matter how strained things might be, they're still your family." With trembling fingers, I dialed Molly's number first. She lived out in California with her husband and 2 young kids, her life a whirlwind of career and parenting that often left little room for her aging parents back in Missouri. "Mom, is everything okay?" Molly's voice was tinged with concern when she answered. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Molly, it's your father. He's left. Packed a bag and walked out. Said he needed space." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the gears turning in Molly's mind as she processed the news. "What? But why? That doesn't sound like Dad at all." "I don't know, honey. He didn't give me any real explanation," I replied, my voice wavering. "He just said he was going to stay with his mother for a while." Molly let out a frustrated sigh. "Typical. He never could communicate, could he? Are you okay, Mom? Do you need me to come home?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, I'll be all right. Frances is here with me. I thought you should know." After a few more reassurances, I hung up, feeling both comforted and drained by the conversation. Next, I steeled myself to call Jacob, my son, who lived in Denver with his long-term girlfriend. The conversation with Jacob was much the same, a mixture of shock, concern, and that underlying current of tension that had always existed between us. He promised to check in regularly, but I could sense his hesitation, the unspoken words hanging in the air. As I set the phone down, Frances gave me a sympathetic look. That couldn't have been easy. I shook my head warily. No, but it's a start, I suppose. At least they know what's going on. Frances nodded, her expression thoughtful. You know, Eliza, this might be a chance for you to really reconnect with them, to mend some of those frayed bonds. I sighed, running a hand through my graying hair. I don't know, Frances. There's so much history there, so many missed opportunities and misunderstandings. All the more reason to try, she insisted. You can't change the past, but you can shape the future. And who knows, maybe this whole mess with Harold will be the wake-up call you all needed. Her words struck a chord within me, and I nodded slowly. You're right. I can't just sit back and let this tear my family apart any further. With renewed determination, I began sorting through the clutter in the study, searching for any clues that might shed light on Harold's sudden departure. That's when I stumbled upon an old, yellowed envelope tucked away in a drawer. A letter from Harold's mother, Rose, postmarked years ago. My hands trembled as I opened it, my eyes scanning the spidery handwriting. Rose had always been a stern, uncompromising woman, and her words were laced with thinly veiled criticism and disapproval of our marriage. As I read on, a sense of unease crept over me. Rose had clearly harbored resentments and doubts about our relationship, doubts that Harold had seemingly shared with her. Had those seeds of discontent taken root over the years, festering until they finally drove him away? I clutched the letter tightly, a new resolve taking hold. If I wanted answers, if I wanted to understand what had truly led to this fracture in my life, I would have to confront the source, Rose herself. Frances noticed the determined set of my jaw and raised an eyebrow. What is it, Eliza? What did you find? I met her gaze, my voice steady. A letter from Rose, and I think it's time I paid her a visit. The drive to Rose's house was tense and silent, the weight of unanswered questions hanging heavy in the air. Frances insisted on coming with me, her presence a steadying force in the storm of emotions swirling within. As we pulled up to the modest bungalow, I steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. Rose had always been a formidable woman, her sharp tongue and uncompromising nature a source of friction in our family. But now, with Harold's sudden departure and the revelations in her letter, I knew she held the key to unraveling the mysteries that had upended my life. The door swung open before I could knock, and there she stood, Rose Parker, her steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes narrowing as she took us in. "Eliza," she said, her voice clipped, "I should have known you'd come sniffing around eventually." I squared my shoulders, refusing to be cowed. "Rose, we need to talk. About Harold, about what's going on." She pursed her lips, considering me for a moment before stepping aside to let us in. "Very well. But I warn you, you may not like what you hear." As we settled in her living room, the tension was palpable. Rose wasted no time in cutting to the heart of the matter. "Harold's been unhappy for years, Eliza, trapped in a marriage that slowly suffocated him, crushed by expectations he could never live up to." Her words hit me like a physical blow, and I struggled to maintain my composure. "What are you talking about? Harold never said anything to me." Rose let out a derisive snort. "Of course he didn't. That's just the kind of man he is, bottling everything up until it festers and poisons him from the inside out." Frances placed a steadying hand on my arm as Rose continued, her words like knives slicing through the illusions I had clung to for so long. "He's been in contact with an old flame, you know, June Mitchell. She's been a sympathetic ear, someone who understands his struggles in a way you never could." The name hung in the air, a weight pressing down on my chest. June Mitchell, a ghost from Harold's past, now resurrected to haunt our present. That's not possible," I stammered, even as doubt crept in, whispering insidious truths I had been too blind to see. Rose fixed me with a piercing stare. "Isn't it, though? Think about it, Eliza. All the signs were there, if you'd only opened your eyes." As her words sank in, a wave of hurt and anger washed over me. How could Harold have betrayed me like this? How could he have allowed this other woman to worm her way into our lives, to poison the well of our marriage? But beneath the fury, a newfound resolve took root. I would not be a passive victim in this tragedy. If Harold had chosen to abandon our life together, to seek solace in the arms of another, then I would confront him. I would demand answers, and I would make him face the consequences of his actions. I rose to my feet, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Thank you for your honesty, Rose. It's more than I ever got from your son." She inclined her head, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "Don't thank me yet, Eliza. The truth is a double-edged sword, and you may find yourself cut deeper than you ever imagined." As Frances and I made our way back to the car, I could feel the weight of Rose's words settling over me. But I refused to be cowed, refused to let this break me. Harold had made his choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: I would not go gently into that good night. I would fight for the truth, for the life I deserved, even if it meant burning everything to the ground and rising from the ashes. Armed with the truth about Harold's affair, I knew I had to confront him directly. Frances tried to dissuade me, worried about the emotional toll it would take, but I was resolute. Too many years had been wasted in the shadows of half-truths and unspoken resentments. It was time to drag everything into the light, no matter how painful. Rose begrudgingly provided me with Harold's whereabouts, a seedy motel on the outskirts of town, where he had been staying since leaving our home. The drive there felt like a march towards an inevitable reckoning, each mile bringing me closer to the moment when I would finally face the man who had so thoroughly betrayed me. When I arrived, Harold was sitting on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. He looked up as I entered, his eyes widening in surprise and something else. Shame, perhaps. "Eliza," he began, rising to his feet. "What are you doing here?" I held up a hand, cutting him off. "Don't bother with the pleasantries, Harold. I know about June. I know you've been carrying on an affair with her behind my back." His shoulders slumped, and he averted his gaze, unable to meet my eyes. "How did you find out?" "Does it matter?" I snapped. "What matters is that you lied to me, betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way. How could you do this to me, Harold, to our marriage?" He shook his head slowly, his expression a mixture of regret and resignation. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. June, she understood me in a way you never could. She made me feel alive again, like I wasn't just going through the motions." His words cut deep, but I refused to let him see how much they stung. "So that's your excuse? You threw away decades of marriage because some other woman made you feel good about yourself?" Harold sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's more complicated than that, Eliza. Our marriage has been dying a slow death for years, and you know it. We've been drifting apart, living separate lives under the same roof. June was just an escape." I clenched my fists, fury rising within me like a tidal wave. "An escape? Is that all I was to you, Harold? A prison to be escaped from?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. "You know, I found June's letters to you. All those poisonous words, planting seeds of doubt and resentment, encouraging you to leave me. She manipulated you, Harold, played on your weaknesses like a virtuoso." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a crack in the facade of indifference he had been projecting. "What are you talking about? June would never—" I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course she would. She's been jealous of me for years, ever since we were young. This was her twisted way of finally winning, of taking you away from me." Harold shook his head slowly, realization dawning on his features. I had no idea. She made it seem like she was just trying to help me find happiness." "Well, now you know the truth," I said, my voice hard as steel. "The question is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to keep running, keep letting her manipulate you? Or are you finally going to take responsibility for your actions?" He met my gaze then, and for a moment, I saw a glimmer of the man I had once loved, the man who had promised to cherish and honor me until death did us part. "I don't know," he said softly. "I've made such a mess of things, Eliza. I don't know if I can ever make it right." I held his gaze, my jaw set with determination. "That's up to you, Harold. But I'll tell you this. I'm done being a victim in this story. If you want to keep wallowing in self-pity and letting June pull your strings, be my guest. But I'm taking my life back, with or without you." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving him to ponder the wreckage of our life together. As I stepped back into the harsh light of day, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but one thing was certain. I would not be defined by Harold's betrayal or June's twisted machinations. I was Eliza Parker, and I was just getting started. After my confrontation with Harold, a fire was lit within me. I was done being a passive observer in my own life, allowing others to dictate my path. With France's unwavering support, I began to piece together the full extent of June's manipulations, poring over the letters and emails she had sent to Harold over the years. The more I uncovered, the sicker I felt. June had been slowly poisoning Harold's mind, planting seeds of doubt and resentment, preying on his insecurities and fears of failure. Her words were like a carefully crafted web, ensnaring him deeper with each passing year until he could no longer see the truth. That vindictive snake, Frances spat as we read through the latest batch of letters. She's been playing the long game, waiting for her chance to strike. I nodded grimly, feeling a mixture of anger and pity for Harold. As much as his actions had devastated me, it was clear that he had been a victim too, manipulated by a woman consumed by jealousy and a twisted desire for revenge. "We need to stop her," I said, my voice steely with determination. "She can't be allowed to keep ruining lives like this." Frances gave me a praising look. "You're sure about this, Eliza? Going after June won't be easy, and it could get messy." I met her gaze unflinching. "I'm sure. For too long, I've let others dictate the course of my life. It's time I took control and fought for what's right." A slow smile spread across Frances's face. "That's my girl. All right, let's hatch a plan." Over the next few weeks, we carefully laid the groundwork, gathering evidence and formulating our strategy. I knew that simply confronting June wouldn't be enough. She was too skilled at manipulation, too adept at twisting the truth to suit her needs. No, we needed to expose her lies in a way that left no room for doubt, no avenue for her to slither out of accountability. As we dug deeper, a clearer picture emerged of June's motivations. It wasn't just about winning Harold. It was about winning, period. She had harbored a deep-seated envy and resentment towards me ever since we were young, always feeling like she lived in my shadow. Harold had been her twisted way of finally claiming victory, of proving her superiority. But even as I uncovered the depths of her depravity, I felt something else stirring within me, a newfound sense of self-worth and independence. June's actions, as despicable as they were, had inadvertently given me the push I needed to break free from the shackles of my unfulfilling marriage and rediscover my own strength. With Frances's guidance, I began to rebuild my life piece by piece. I volunteered at the local community center, reconnected with old friends, and even took up painting, a hobby I had abandoned years ago in the pursuit of being the perfect wife and mother. With each small step, I felt myself growing stronger, more resilient. The weight of Harold's betrayal, once a crushing burden, began to lighten as I realized that my worth was not defined by his actions or June's twisted games. And as I looked ahead, I knew that the road to true freedom would not be an easy one. June would not go quietly into the night, and Harold's role in all of this remained unresolved. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose, a determination to reclaim the life that had been slowly slipping away from me. I was Eliza Parker, and I was just getting started. With France's unwavering support, I knew the time had come to confront June directly. We had gathered enough evidence of her manipulations, her twisted machinations that had torn my family apart. It was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. The journey to Florida, where June had been living since her split from her own husband, felt like a march towards an inevitable reckoning. Each mile brought me closer to the woman who had so thoroughly upended my life, all in pursuit of some misguided sense of victory over me. When I finally stood on her doorstep, a wave of emotions washed over me. Anger, hurt, a burning desire for justice. I steeled myself and knocked, my heart pounding in my chest. June opened the door, and for a moment, her eyes widened in surprise before a sickly sweet smile spread across her face. "Why, Eliza Parker? What a lovely surprise." I held up a hand, cutting off her false pleasantries. "Cut the act, June. We both know why I'm here." Her smile faltered, and she regarded me with a cool gaze. "Do we now? And what, pray tell, do you think you know?" Without a word, I thrust the stack of letters and emails into her hands, watching as her expression shifted from feigned innocence to something darker, more calculating. "I know about your lies, June. I know how you've been manipulating Harold for years, planting seeds of doubt and resentment, encouraging him to leave me." My voice was steady, fueled by a righteous anger that burned within me. June's lips curled into a sneer as she flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the damning evidence. So what? Harold was a lost cause, a man trapped in a loveless marriage. I merely showed him the way out. "You did more than that, and you know it," I shot back. "This wasn't about helping Harold. It was about your own twisted need to win, to finally best me after all these years." A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, passed over June's features, and for a moment, the mask slipped, revealing the bitter, envious woman beneath. "You always had everything, didn't you, Eliza?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "The perfect husband, the perfect life, while I was left with the scraps. Well, not anymore. I took what was yours, and there's nothing you can do about it." Her words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to back down. "You're wrong, June. You may have taken Harold, but you'll never take my self-worth, my dignity. Those are mine, and no amount of your scheming can change that." June's eyes narrowed, and she took a step towards me, her finger jabbing into my chest. "We'll see about that, Eliza. We'll see who's left standing when the dust settles." But as she spoke, I felt something shift within me, a weight lifting, a burden finally cast aside. June's threats, her posturing, it all rang hollow. She was a bitter, twisted woman clinging to the past, while I had already begun to forge a new path forward. I met her gaze, unflinching. "You know what, June? You're right. We will see who's left standing, but I have a feeling it won't be the woman who spent her life mired in jealousy and resentment." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving June sputtering in my wake. As I stepped out into the Florida sunshine, I felt a sense of catharsis wash over me. The confrontation had been painful, but it had also been liberating. A chance to finally face the root of my pain and emerge stronger on the other side. I was no longer defined by Harold's choices or June's schemes. I was Eliza Parker, a woman forged in the fires of betrayal and reborn into something stronger, something unbreakable. And as I looked towards the horizon, I knew that the best was yet to come. After my cathartic confrontation with June, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders. The twisted web of lies and manipulation she had spun had finally been exposed, leaving her to grapple with the consequences of her actions. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to revel in that sense of victory, of having reclaimed my power and self-worth. But deep down, I knew that the true battle was far from over. Harold's role in this saga remained unresolved, a lingering specter that threatened to undermine the progress I had made. I knew eventually I would have to face him again, to confront the man who had so thoroughly betrayed me and decide once and for all whether our marriage was worth salvaging. That moment came sooner than I expected. I had returned home from Florida, my mind still processing the events of the past few weeks, when the doorbell rang. Francis, ever my steadfast companion, answered the door, only to usher in a haggard-looking Harold. "Eliza," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we need to talk." I regarded him coolly, my newfound strength and independence acting as a bulwark against the flood of memories and emotions his presence stirred within me. "Talk?" I echoed. "About what, Harold? About how you threw away our marriage for a twisted fantasy spun by a bitter, jealous woman?" He flinched at my words, but didn't back down. "I know, Eliza. I know what June did, how she manipulated me, played on my insecurities and fears. But that's no excuse for my actions." I arched an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "I was weak," he admitted, his shoulders slumping. "I let myself be led astray, blinded by my own sense of failure and inadequacy. But seeing you stand up to June, seeing the strength and resilience you've shown, it opened my eyes." He took a step towards me, his eyes pleading. "I don't expect your forgiveness, Eliza. I know I've hurt you in ways that can never be undone, but I need you to know that I'm sorry, truly and deeply sorry for the pain I've caused you." His words hung in the air, heavy with remorse and regret. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the love I had once held for this man, the man who had promised to cherish and honor me until death did us part. But that flicker was quickly extinguished by the memory of his betrayal, of the months of anguish and heartbreak I had endured. I shook my head slowly. "I appreciate your apology, Harold, but words can only go so far. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." His face fell, but he nodded, seeming to accept my response. "I understand," he said quietly. "Just know that I'll be here waiting for as long as it takes. You've shown me what true strength and resilience look like, Eliza, and if there's even a chance to earn back your trust, your love, I'll take it." With that, he turned and left, leaving me to ponder his words and the implications they carried. Francis placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Are you all right, dear?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I will be, Francis. I will be." In that moment, I knew that Harold's plea for forgiveness, as heartfelt as it may have been, was not something I could grant, at least not yet. The wounds were still too raw, the betrayal too fresh. But I also knew that I had emerged from this ordeal stronger, more resilient, and more certain of my own worth than ever before. Whatever the future held, I would face it on my own terms, guided by the strength and independence I had fought so hard to reclaim. Harold's redemption, if it was to come, would be a long and arduous journey. But I was ready to walk that path, secure in the knowledge that I held the power to shape my own destiny. In the aftermath of Harold's plea for forgiveness, I found myself at a crossroads. Part of me yearned to grant him the absolution he sought, to find a way to rebuild what had been so thoroughly shattered. But a larger part, the part that had been forged in the fires of betrayal and heartbreak, knew that such a path would only lead to more pain. It was Francis who helped me see the way forward. "Eliza, dear," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "you've come so far, fought so hard to reclaim your independence and sense of self. Don't let Harold's remorse sway you from that path." Her words resonated deeply within me. She was right. I had clawed my way back from the brink, emerging stronger and more resilient than ever before. To simply forgive Harold, to slip back into the patterns of our old life, would be to undo all that hard-won progress. And so, with a heavy heart, I made the decision to keep moving forward, to continue forging my own path without the weight of Harold's baggage holding me back. It was a choice that brought both pain and liberation. The pain came from the lingering tendrils of love and attachment that still bound me to the man I had once sworn to cherish until death did us part. But the liberation, that was a heady draught, a taste of the freedom I had so desperately craved. With Francis's steadfast support, I turned my focus inward, mending the frayed bonds with my children, Molly and Jacob. Years of neglect and misunderstanding had driven wedges between us. But now, in the wake of my own personal rebirth, I was determined to bridge those divides. It wasn't easy. Old wounds ran deep, and there were times when the hurt and resentment threatened to overwhelm us all. But slowly, steadily, we chipped away at the walls that had separated us, rediscovering the love and connection that had been buried beneath the rubble of our fractured family. And through it all, Francis was there, a steadying presence, a reminder of the importance of living authentically and without regret. Her own life, marked by loss and missed opportunities, had instilled in her a wisdom that she freely imparted to me. "Life is too short, Eliza," she would say, her eyes shining with a bittersweet melancholy. "Too short to waste on bitterness and resentment. Cherish the moments you have, and never let fear hold you back from living fully." Her words proved prophetic, for not long after, Francis passed away, leaving a void in my life that could never truly be filled. But even in her absence, her legacy lived on, a guiding light that illuminated my path forward. It was in the wake of her passing that I made the decision to truly embrace the freedom I had fought so hard to attain. I packed a bag and set out on a solo journey, a pilgrimage of sorts, to a small coastal town where the rhythms of the ocean promised to soothe my weary soul. There, amidst the crashing waves and salty air, I found a peace that had long eluded me. I spent my days walking along the beach, journaling and simply existing in the present moment, unburdened by the ghosts of my past. It was during those quiet moments that I began to truly understand the depth of my own strength, the resilience that had carried me through the darkest of times. And as I looked towards the horizon, I knew that my journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, I welcomed the unknown with open arms, ready to embrace whatever life had in store. For I was Eliza Parker, a woman reborn, and the best was yet to come.